Mr. Chairman.
Senator Crapo.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment dealing with our GSEs, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the history of the treatment of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but this amendment does not seek...
I thought this was just a House problem. Go ahead, all right.
Yeah, we haven't done it over here today.
It's contagious, obviously.
And we haven't got it right yet, so we need to get back at it. But this amendment really seeks to just make sure that in our federal budgeting we treat this issue properly. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I supported an amendment when we were drafting this legislation that would have gone much further down the road toward making Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac a part of this bill and making sure this bill deals with resolving the issues at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. But this amendment deals with including Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as a part of the federal budget as long as either institution is under conservatorship or receivership. It would also reestablish the $200 billion per cap entity and accelerate the 10% reductions of the mortgage portfolios, effectively requiring the companies to shrink those portfolios by holding a combined $100 billion from their current levels. Although it failed to reach 60 votes, it did get a majority of votes when we voted on it in the Senate, and this conference committee should seriously consider it. The purpose of the amendment is to show the American people the true picture of how much our national debt has been increased by the bailout of these two institutions. According to CBO Director Douglas Elmendorf, and I'm quoting, after the U.S. government assumed control in 2008 of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, two federally chartered institutions that provide credit guarantees for almost half of the outstanding residential mortgages in the United States, and I insert there, Mr. Chairman, now it's much more than half. The Congressional Budget Office concluded that these institutions had effectively become government entities whose operations should be included in the federal budget. That's the CBO director. At the end of calendar year 2009, per the financial statements, those figures are $774 billion for Fannie Mae and $781 billion for Freddie Mac, for a total of $1.555 trillion. To put this into perspective as to how large these entities are, their combined total books of business are nearly $5.5 trillion. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that in the wake of the housing bubble and the unprecedented deflation in housing values that resulted, the government's cost to bail out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will eventually reach $381 billion. And that estimate may be far too optimistic. On May 5th, Freddie Mac reported losing $8 billion in the first quarter and requested yet another $10.6 billion from the taxpayers, saying that it's going to need more in the future. On May 10th, Fannie Mae reported losing $11.5 billion, its 11th consecutive quarterly loss, and asked for $8.4 billion more, yes, from the taxpayers. So far, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have received $145 billion from the taxpayers, and as I just said, that's expected to grow to $381 billion or more. The federal government now owns 80% of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and guarantees more than $1.7 trillion of their debt. Since being placed in conservatorship in 2008, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have actually become a bigger part of the market, which will make reform of them even more difficult. Last quarter, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were responsible for funding fully 2/3 of all U.S. home loans. When you add in the Federal Housing Administration, the U.S. government is now behind 96.5% of all loans. Last Christmas Eve, the Secretary of Treasury announced that it was lifting the $400 billion loss cap on these two companies, creating a potentially unlimited liability and effectively providing the full faith and credit of the U.S. government in supporting their debt. According to a January 2010 CBO background paper titled CBO's Budget Treatment of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, CBO believes that the federal government's current financial and operational relationship with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac warrants their inclusion in the budget. By contrast, the current administration has taken a different approach to treating Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as outside the federal budget, recording and projecting outlays equal to the amounts of any cash infusions made by Treasury into these entities. The Office of Management and Budget's budget of the U.S. government, fiscal year 2011, states, under the approach in the budget, all of the GSE's transactions with the public are non-budgetary because GSEs are not considered to be government agencies. CBO has included the GSEs in its baseline budget but does not include their debt in their computations of debt because CBO has taken a narrow view of federal debt. In light of the Christmas Eve taxpayer massacre, where the debt limits were basically erased, making unlimited exposure of the U.S. taxpayer to these losses, I believe it's only appropriate that the American taxpayer know what the exposure is. This amendment does not require a specific resolution of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac like I believe should be started in this legislation. It simply says we'll stop telling the American public only part of the story, and that we will tell the American public the entire story about what this debt is going to do to our country and what the assumption of the liabilities of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are going to do to our federal budget process. I ask my colleagues to consider and support this amendment.